Interesting point. And I told you guys last time when I asked the question, Sonic Rose is actually the one that inspired this question, because we were having a conversation during the marathon about how bad grammar really has just become a part of culture. You know, I remember being, playing Counter-Strike back in the late 90s and early 2000s, when Leet Speak was kind of taking on its own little universe out there. And now this kind of geek speak, which isn't really Leet Speak, it's just kind of amalgamations of all the different, geek speech communities out there, has really propagated, itself out there into the cultural zeitgeist. And to the point where now almost everyone, like when my dad texts me now, he uses a letter R for the word A-R-E. And I feel like that's such a horrible and terrible thing. I've never done that, and I hope to never do it in my life, because I don't want to lose that ability to be able to write as a coherent person. I'll tell you this, in business, I've seen people write in business now with tremendously bad grammar and with bad spelling. And not just because they're writing an email on their iPhone with autocorrect, but because that's what they've taught their devices and themselves to do as a shorthand for being able to disseminate information. I think this is terrible, and I think the internet has really glorified as several of you said this about, we had to condense things. May has made the point, for example, of condensing speech into more digestible formats, which I think is always a heuristic, meaning that it's a cognitive shortcut, meaning that it actually takes away a huge part of the argument. It takes away all the meat and potatoes and strips it down to something that is almost useless, which is just the crux, and doesn't actually get us to what the whole argument is really about. Grammar, for better or for worse, is being affected in this regard. If you look at the words that get added to the Oxford English Dictionary every year, because every year they have a list of those words, and they put it out, I think in December every year, the words get just more and more ridiculous as the years go on. Now some of them are interesting, like common parlance, like to Google something. So Google as a verb is in the Oxford English Dictionary. It means to go out into the internet and search something by virtue of the search engine Google. Wow, interesting, right? That's a word that wouldn't have ever been in anyone's parlance even just 15 years ago. So it's completely changed. And I think that the way the lexicon has changed, and the way, that's not necessarily a bad thing, by the way, but the way the grammar has changed, I think, is a terrible thing. And as we move forward in life, some of you are much more practical. You say, as long as people can understand what messages are, I don't care how people speak. Grammar is just a set of rules. There's no specification or reason or rhyme to that. I am amenable to that position, and I agree with what you're saying. I don't know. I'm not really there on that one. Mr. Andy Creedon talked about the ease of information access. So the fact that the internet is actually making us smarter because of the fact that things are so much easier to get a hold of. I think that's very true. And I am absolutely on the same page. Who out there has not done this before? You go look something up on Wikipedia just because you want a quick 5-minute reference. If you want to go look at other stuff, you can, which I've done before. But then you find yourself 10 or 12 Wikipedia pages down the line because you got so interested in all the different ancillary parts of it. I do that all the time, folks, and I think it does help to broaden our perspectives. And I've picked up so many small, trivial bits of information by doing that, that I think that's a very, very good point. To the extent, though, that it's made me smarter, I'm not sure. I just know that it's certainly helped me pick up on a lot of very trivial pieces of information which could help me win a trivia game. That's very possible. Jerome Flint Steele. It makes the point that I said is kind of the common principle among almost all the arguments, that it's not the internet itself, but instead it's how we use it that makes the difference. And Jerome Flint Steele's point is that actually most people use it to do things that aren't very intelligent or aren't really adding to people's intelligence. Instead, it's doing something very different than that, and I think that's very true. Maybe it's not necessarily how we use it. I'm sorry, maybe it's not the internet itself is what I mean. Maybe it is simply how we use the internet that's at issue. And in that case, you could easily say, I use the internet to broaden my mind, and therefore it is making me smarter. And guess what? I have no argument for that. the question really is more about culturally, and I'm not sure that you know, we can prove anything with that other than what the Bowtie guy said, which is that it's a reflection of our culture. Red Mage talked about the demographics of the internet contribute to its overall image. And while Red Mage never probably used the actual term demographics, what he did talk about was the idea that there are communities that use it for particular reasons, and that contributes to it. Now, think about this. When the internet came about, most of the people that used it were really, to a certain extent, for a very long time, were really only just the most elitist of the computer geeks. People that actually could afford connections, get on, have connections, and then manage those connections and understand what it meant to connect with them. It later kind of evolved into something that everyone could use to do something, but even then it was really only for mostly the upper middle class, in the very early stages, that could afford it and could, especially because of all the long distance fees and things like that were involved. And even then there weren't a whole lot of things to do about it. Things began to then kind of propagate all the way down, where you have now, the internet is almost accessible by pretty much anyone that has any kind of a device that can access it, or if you have access to even a public library, which is pretty much everyone in the entire country. And, all over the world there are similar kinds of institutions. So the internet is so ubiquitous now. But the fact of the matter is, I think if you ask people how they use the internet, more often than not, what you're going to find is you're going to find the kind of underbelly of humanity before you find some of the more, some of the more kind of high-end, some of the higher pursuits of humanity, right? And you guys know what I mean. Piracy, illegal purchasing of things, whether it be drugs or prescriptions or things like that. You find obviously pornography, which is a tremendous part of the internet. You find all these kinds of things that people do. Or let's go back to some of the less intellectual pursuits of humanity, like TMZ.com, or I want to go connect with my friends, or I want to go connect with the Jersey Shore program, or I know it's going off the air now, but, all those kinds of things that kind of surround these things that we know and we like. Most of the time when we use the internet, it's not for our kind of higher end intellectual pursuits. I would say a great majority of the internet is not built that way, or is not used that way. But that doesn't mean that the internet is making us stupider. It just means that maybe it certainly presents itself as being a lot more popular for a particular demographic. So I think Red Mage's point is very well taken. Now, here's an interesting point from Maze that I liked. Filtering, in other words, the filtering of information, is a matter and function of intellect. And therefore, another way to measure whether the internet is making us dumber is by understanding if the internet is making us better or worse filterers of information. And I would say, in many cases, it actually has made us a lot better in terms of being filters of information. I could be completely wrong with this. There are people out there that disagree with this position. Most famously, I think one of my favorite scholars of the internet and the mind, Nicholas Carr, C-A-R-R, who really talks about the effects of the internet on our brains. And I think, one thing that it has made many of us is ADD. Doesn't necessarily mean we're all stupid, or the people with ADD are stupid. Not at all. But I definitely find myself having more ADD tendencies because of the filtering that I do with internet information now. That, to me, is a fantastic point. I like the idea that I can filter through a lot of information now. I like the idea, as Mays said, when I see something on the internet that piques my interest, I assume bias. I went through journalism programs, folks. I know that everyone that writes anything is biased. When I write things on the Clan of the Great Wolf, when I present things to you here on the Weekly Wringer, it has some kind of subjective bias to it. I understand that. You guys understand that, and you forgive me part of it because, you want to connect with the ideas that we create with. Same is true of news media outlets, regardless of what size, what creed, what culture. So therefore, there is no objective media. So what I end up doing is exactly what May said, which is I'll go take a piece of information that I think is interesting, get a perspective of it, filter it down. But then I'll go and I'll digest a couple more alternative sources of the same information before I really make up my mind as to what is actually going on there. And what that does, I think, is it creates a lot more of a kind of centralized and more filtered and more strong belief system about kind of the things that you know, quote unquote, right? And that makes the information age very interesting. What I think, though, we cannot ignore, and this is why I think I have to take a little bit of an issue with this, is that for many people, it has made them less good at filtering. It's made them worse at filtering information. It's made them more quick to digest it. Several of you talked about the quickness of digesting information by believing anything, right? I think the internet aids that a lot more than it goes to folks like Mays and myself, where we actually filter things down and want to get things in 2 and 3 different sources before we believe anything. I think the internet does more of the latter, the former than the latter. I think it actually creates more people that are less interested. And as I hear people talk on the news, and as I hear people write comments and things like that on the internet that are not part of this wonderful website we have here, I see a lot of ignorance that gets floated out around there just by virtue of people believe whatever the first headline they read on the internet is. And so I think if you're going to use that as an argument, I think you have to bear the full brunt of it. I don't have any statistics on this, guys, and I'm also not a neurologist. I'm not a neuroscientist. I am not a scholar of how the internet affects our brains. I'm just a guy that likes a lot of things that has to do with the internet and am interested in the way that it's affecting us. So, maybe I know nothing on this, but I think I echo the sentiments of many of you. Ruben, lastly, said that, and I thought this was really interesting, great way to tie it back, and again, great to have you on board, Ruben. We should listen to the lessons of RPGs. And here's what I love about this. So several of us talked about the internet being a tool. It wasn't determinate, it was just simply a tool. Well, Ruben says we need to learn the lessons of RPGs, which is that tools can be used for good and tools can be used for evil. We have to make the choice therein. And I think this is the best summation of what my point is absolutely as well, which is that the internet is completely capable of doing both things. It is a tremendous tool that humanity has developed to be able to share information like no other. And I find it difficult to stomach many times when I see the ignorance and stupidity that it propagates. However, I am a person that believes in freedom down to a fault. And if you give people the freedom to be able to propagate as much information as you can, both bad, good, both evil and good, both disgusting and, beautiful, whatever you have, whatever you want, you have to embrace both sides of that if you embrace the true freedom of the internet. And therefore, you're going to see a lot of people use it for really awful things, and you're going to see a lot of people use it for really great things. And I think that's part of the beauty of it. And so my position is exactly the same. I think we should learn the lessons of the RPGs, that the tools of our creation as a human race are indeterminate. They are simply tools within which we can use for really evil things, for really good things, and everything in between. That really goes to solidify my position as well. Anyway, guys, I hope this was a good conversation. I really enjoyed this one. You guys wrote some really, really intelligent comments, and what obviously originated from a very simple idea. Came into one of my favorite weekly ringers in a long time. So thank you all for being a part of that, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. We got pretty heady about the whole thing, but that's okay. All right, now I want to move on. There's a great topic for this coming week. I think it's going to be pretty heady as well. It's going to be you got to put your thinking caps on this one as well, because I thought this was a pretty well high thought, high thinking kind of question. So one of the things, and by the way, there's so many things I could have asked about that that happen at CES and all these other great things that are happening in gaming right now. But you know what? We talk about gaming all the time. I want to really talk about thought and how we as geeks kind of process information. It's interesting to me. Here's something that I did over the course of. So I'll talk about those things, but probably later. What I want to talk about today is something that I did over the winter break And over the course of my New Year's vacation that I took, where I went to Washington, D.C., and I saw some pretty cool stuff there. When I went to D.C.,